In this video, I'm going to show you how to simplify the process of painting in watercolor. You can take the principles I teach here and paint just about anything. We will paint together these 2 red apples on a white plate. By the time we're done, you can have a painting that looks like this. I'll show you what colors I use, what brushes I use, what to paint first, how to mix the right consistency of paint for each stage of the painting, and most importantly, how to get the values right. I often encourage my students to start with painting still life subjects, like fruit or vegetables or small objects that you have around the house. These subjects are usually simple in shape, they're readily available, they sit still while you paint them, and they come in a variety of colors. So today we're going to paint some apples. Let's get started. Welcome to my studio. My name is Kris. This channel is all about tools and tips and tutorials for growing in watercolor. In addition to the full-length tutorial in this video, I also have a growing collection of free resources and courses on my website at studio.krisdebruine.com. I encourage you to follow the links in the description below to accelerate your growth in this amazing medium of watercolor. Now let's jump into the tutorial. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how I paint this painting in watercolor of 2 red apples on a white plate. Here's my reference image that I use. This is a picture that I took. It is copyright free. You're free to use it for the purposes of completing this tutorial. I will include a link to the image in the video description below. Now here are the colors that I chose to use for this painting. I have a nice warm red, Pyro Red. I have a very warm yellow, Permanent Yellow Deep. I'm using a more medium temperature yellow, Hansa Yellow Medium. I have a convenience green color, Green Gold, it's a Daniel Smith color. I'm using cobalt blue for my blue, and transparent yellow oxide, which is an earth tone yellow, very, very similar to yellow ochre. And at the end of the video, I also use a little white gouache to add some highlights to the painting. The first step in the painting process is to establish the first wash. The first wash is typically completed with very thin consistency paint. I call this the tea consistency, tea to coffee. Basically, it's mostly water and very little pigment. I am mixing up my transparent yellow oxide with a little bit of the Pyro Red to make somewhat of an orange color. I'm going to paint the background first, which in the reference image you see is the tabletop in the background. It's a little darker in the reference image, more dark brown, but I've decided to keep it a lighter value and lighter hue color, so I'm going with this kind of orangey yellow. And I have a big squirrel brush. This is a Princeton Neptune Quill number 6. Very thirsty brush, lots of water. And I'm painting right along the top edge of the plate and apples and the right side of the plate. Now I'm going to go down and paint along that left side of the plate as well, and creating a nice hard edge. I am painting wet on dry. Again, tea consistency paint. Really easy, since it's wet on dry, to keep a nice crisp edge on the edge of the plate. And along the top of the apples. I'm going to just mix up a little blue, my cobalt blue, a little bit of the Pyro Red into this orange color, just to give a variety of color in the background. Not a lot of variation, just a little bit to give interest. Now I'm going to speed up the video a bit just to finish up this background. The next step in the tutorial is to finish the first wash. I'm going to mix up some of my green gold here. A very light wash. Again, this is the first wash. Everything should be tea to coffee consistency. However, I'm just going to go ahead and paint the rest of, or paint the apples now, starting in the upper left corner of the apples. We see there's a very brilliant green, a yellowish green in that area. So I put that in first. I always work from one edge of an area to the other edge. I do what's called working the bead. So there's a wet edge to the paint as you put it down, And you want to just keep working along that wet edge and not jumping around and painting in different areas of the subject. And this allows, since you're putting wet paint up against other wet paint, it allows it to blend. Watercolor has a beautiful quality of blending colors. Colors charge into each other and blend on the paper, giving you beautiful effects, and you want to take advantage of that. That is a quality of watercolor that's not really found in other mediums. So again, you can see that effect taking place here as the reds and the yellows and greens are blending on that apple. I'm going to continue into the other apple. I want to have a variety of values and colors as I'm putting this first wash down. So I'm moving from red to orange to yellow to a greenish color and back again. I'm also using a clean wet brush in some places to soften the edge or just lighten and lift some of the color just to lighten those areas. I'm just constantly looking at my reference image. Again, I'm not getting exactly the correct values yet, the relative lightness and darkness. I'm just trying to get the general color of that area, especially the lightest colors that I see shining through in these areas. Now I've moved into the cast shadow, and I'm mixing now my cobalt blue with this pyro red and a little bit of the orange that was already on the palette, mixing up a kind of a burgundy color, fairly dark, purpley burgundy color. And again, now that I'm moving further from the apple, I'm going to make it a bit bluer. So I've added more blue. And if you see in the reference image, the shadow or cast shadow of the apples do get more blue as you move further from the apples. Now I'm painting that cast shadow of the plate and just putting that down. Again, it's not nearly as dark as what we see in the reference image, but I'm not trying to get the right values yet, just get the general colors that I see in these areas and doing it very loosely just to kill the whites on the paper and give me my first wash. The last step in the first wash is to put a little tone on the plate. The plate is very white in the reference image, but it's not pure white. There's actually a fair bit of blue, a little bit of pink reflecting there in the plate, and just kind of a grayish tone in some places. So I've mixed up some of my cobalt blue. You can see there on the palette, very, very light, very thin consistency, very much mostly water, a little bit of pigment. And I'm painting that left side of the plate, which is the darkest part of the plate. Part of the behind the apples is a little bit darker in the upper right corner of the plate. So I'm just putting that in. Now I'm mixing a little bit of the pink in as well. I just want to get a little variety of color on the plate. So I'm mixing more of a neutral color now. You get a neutral color by combining all your primaries. So I had the blue there already, so I just mixed in a little bit of the reddish and orangish colors that were already on the palette, and that combination of all three primaries gives me my more neutral tone. I'm just doing a little dry brush here, lifting up some of the paint that is kind of charged from the apple into the plate. I'm not worried about that happening too much. I kind of like it when colors cross over the lines, so to speak, from one part of the painting to the other. You don't have to paint inside the lines all the time. And actually, there's a fair bit of reflected light coming off the apples onto the plate, so it makes sense that some of that paint is flowing down into the plate area. Okay, with that, I am done with the first wash. So here's a little close-up view of the painting, what it looks like at the first wash. Very light values, loose wash, no real hard edges for the most part. Very just kind of getting the colors in the right place, but not worrying too much at all about any of the details. Okay, at this point, you want to let the painting dry till it is, there's really no dampness to the paper. I'm now mixing up my first middle value color. I've mixed up a pretty dark mix of the green gold with some of the cobalt blue, creating a very dark green, bluish green. And I'm painting that shadow area at the top of the left apple. That will give me that form that I see up there, the kind of the top part of the apple. I've now taken a little bit more of a lighter value green, and I'm just dropping that in there, allowing those colors to blend on the paper. Now, it's important to understand the objective of the second wash. The second wash is all about the medium values. So you should be squinting at your reference image, which we see there in the upper right corner, and really looking for the medium and dark values of the painting or the subject. Really, the only light values are the plate and a couple highlights on the apples, maybe those bright yellow areas at the top, the stem area of the apples. But otherwise, most of the rest of the apples are medium to dark. So you're going to see in this section that I will take a variety of colors, reds, oranges, even kind of a cool red that leans towards blue. And I will, as you can see I'm doing here, just start adding medium value to create the form of the apples. The plate at this point is pretty much done. I'm not going to be adding much to the plate. I'm going to leave the background that light yellow golden color. And so the focus of the rest of the tutorial is really the apples. So again, in this middle step, I'm going to focus on getting all the middle values in. Now you notice I'm kind of using a fairly small brush, and I'm kind of painting carefully around that little area on the upper left corner of this first apple it's pretty white or light in the reference image. I failed to keep the white of the paper when I did the first wash in that spot. I wish I'd been more careful and kind of kept that pure white up there. But since I didn't, I'm just retaining the first wash, which now you can see that because I've put this darker value red around that area, you can see it looks quite a bit lighter in contrast. All values are relative, meaning dark only looks dark in relationship to the other values around it. And so I'm putting down a fairly thick and dark red right now, but you'll see a little later, I will even put down even a darker red in the third step. So while it is getting darker, my values are getting darker, they will still get darker even darker yet as we move through the process. So got a warmer red and orange colors on the left side of the apples because they face the light. And I have a cooler red on the right side of the apples, which you see I'm doing now, because it's further away from the light source. And so wherever something, when something is facing the light, it's probably going to be a warmer color, closer towards the yellows in this case, orangey reds, and then more purpley or dark reds when we're in the shadows. So now I'm on the second apple. We see the left side of this apple is also much lighter in value, warmer in temperature. And as I move around to the other side of the apple, I'll darken that. Now I'm using, to talk a bit about my brush, I was using a squirrel hair Neptune brush, a quill number 6 in the first wash. Very thirsty brush, holds tons of water. You can do big washes quite easily with it. But I've now switched to a Princeton Aqua Elite number 16. Fairly large brush as far as round brushes go in the Aqua Elite series, but still smaller than the quill I was using. It has also a finer point. It's a stiffer brush. It does not hold as much water as the quill and the squirrel hair, so I have more control where I'm putting the paint, and I don't tend to get the big rush of paint and water, which creates blooms and things. So it's important that you always are thinking about which brush am I using, how much water's on my brush, how much pigment is on my brush, and how does that relate to how much water and pigment is on the paper where I'm painting right now, because all of these things will affect the outcome as you put the paint on the paper. Now I've noticed that the color, the red color, there on top of the second apple, the apple on the right, is warmer on top, again, because it's facing the light source. So I've mixed up a warmer, more orange red. But I'm also trying to retain some of the first wash, that lighter value, because there's a highlight of light glinting off the top of the apple, and I want to capture that. Again, I did not leave it white, the white of the paper, so I'm just leaving the first wash there, and it looks pretty close to white. Later in the process, at the very end, I'm going to add gouache, which is a opaque white, a white gouache, to those highlight areas to kind of accentuate that light that's glistening on the apple. All right, I've mixed up some of my cobalt blue into the reddish and orange colors I had on my palette. It's mostly a mix of cobalt blue and pyrrole red right now. It's very dark purple, burgundy color. And I have painted the right side of the second apple. I also noticed I got a little bit dark on the lower part there of that apple, so I took a clean wet brush and I did what's called lifting. Very important technique. If you put down too much paint or too dark a paint or the wrong color in your painting, all is not lost. Don't worry, because you can, as long as you do it quickly, you can, again, clean up your brush with some clean water and maybe dry it a bit and then just lift it by dragging it along that area, and the paint that you put down will just lift right up, and you'll see some of the lighter value, which you saw I did there. Okay, so I'm doing the cast shadow now. I'm just doing it with a darker pigment than I did before, so I get a darker value. The cast shadow of the apple is pretty dark. It's one of the darker areas in the painting. So I've used that burgundy kind of closer to the apple because the red of the apple is shining into the cast shadow. And then the further I get away from the apple, that cast shadow gets more blue. So I just mix more of my cobalt blue into the mix. And also I'm working the bead, moving from one color to the other. So as I put wet paint against wet paint, they charge into each other. And I get the effect I'm looking for. All right, now I've mixed up. I took a little of my transparent yellow oxide, that earth tone yellow, and mixed it into the color I already had there. And by having all three primaries, or yellow, red, and blue, I've now gotten a more neutralized color, in this case kind of a brown. And I'm going to just do this cast shadow of the plate. Now, in the reference image, that shadow looks black, like really dark, but I am opting not to use that dark of a color. Cameras, when they take pictures of a subject, they tend to make shadows look too dark, too black. And if you were looking at that subject matter in real life, you would see more variation of color in that shadow. It wouldn't look black. And so knowing that, I'm going to use the colors I did. Also, I just typically don't use black in any of my painting in watercolor. It just tends to be kind of a dead color. It really doesn't look very good. It looks stark and out of place quite often. So your shadow colors usually are a bluish color. In this case, it's a shadow on top of a like wood surface, so I made it more of a brown color. Okay, well, I said earlier that I was done with the plate, but looking a little closer at it, I see there's a bit of a line there on the left side of the plate, a shadow that kind of helps to differentiate the shape of the plate. And so I've mixed up a grayish color, my cobalt blue, a little bit of that red mixture that was already on the palette. Sometimes you'll see me cleaning my palette. If I just need a clean place to mix up a nice fresh color, I'll just use a paper towel and mix and pick up some of the color on the palette, create a little spot there. Also just added some more value, a little darker value to that left side of the plate. I am leaving that white line along the far left side of the plate. That's the side of the plate that's facing the light, so I want to see that edge. Okay, at this point, I am pretty much done with the second wash. The second wash focuses on the middle values. If you compare my painting with the reference image up there, you can see I pretty much match the values. The only thing I have left to do now is paint those really dark areas on the right side of the apple. In order to get our darkest values, we need to mix up thicker paint. Usually in the last stage of the painting, you're using milk to cream consistency in your paint, sometimes even butter consistency, which is really just straight paint right out of the tube. So I've mixed up a bit of very thick mixture of the red, because I see just some darker values along the top of that second apple. Now I'm mixing up with my cobalt blue and red, a very dark purple color, almost black there. It's very, very burgundy, dark red. And I'm putting in that final shadow on the right side of this second apple. I've also just put my brush right into the red, pyrrole red paint. So it's pretty much butter consistency, just pure paint. And I've just kind of accentuated some of that red highlight on the far right. And here I'm putting in those darkest values. Remember earlier I said that while I was putting down some pretty dark paint in the middle value, when I would get to this third stage, it was going to be even darker yet. And you can see now how dark that is. You want to achieve a full range of values in your painting. It's what gives it form. Really what makes it look realistic, makes it look interesting, captures the viewer's eye to have a wide range of values from lightest light to darkest dark. And that's the trick in watercolor is how to do that. And the only way you can get these darker values later in the painting is to use very thick paint, very thick consistency, and applying a really, really dark paint. So I've done that here. Now I'm going to repeat the process on the left apple. I've mixed up my dark purpley burgundy color, and I'm applying that to the right side of that apple. This is what is called the core shadow. It is that darkest part of the form shadow of an object. If you squint at the reference image, you see there's kind of a really dark line that runs right down kind of the middle of that left apple. And it is the darkest part of the shadow or the form shadow. There's form shadow, which is the shape of the object, and there's cast shadow, which is the shadow that an object casts onto other objects. So this is the core shadow. I also see there's some red there along the top of that left apple, so I'm just putting that in. I put in the paint, and I notice it's a little too stark, a little too abrupt, so I take a clean brush and soften the edges. And looking at that now, I'm getting pretty close to being done with the apples. Just taking a close final look to see that the values are right, the shapes are right, and I'm pretty happy with what I see. Now, of course, I take a step back and I see that there's a little bit of a yellowish green color there on the left side of that left apple, so I add that. I look at it, I feel it's a little too maybe abrupt, so I take a clean brush and kind of lift the color a bit, trying to soften that spot. It's an important part in the apple because it's kind of where the light is glistening or glinting off the apple, so it's important to get that right. Now I notice as I take a closer look that I'm missing a little bit of the cast shadow in between the two apples. So I mix up, again, some of my darkest purple color, and I just paint in that shadow there to the lower right of the left apple, in between the two apples. It's important that your cast shadows are faithful, that they are going in the right direction, and that they look like a cast shadow being cast by that object. Okay, I think we're getting close to being done here. I've decided to mix up a very dark, almost black purple color, and I'm going to add my signature to the lower right. When you put in your signature, you want to make sure you keep it far enough into the picture frame that it won't be covered if you matte the paper or matte the painting. Usually matte board extends over the edge of the painting anywhere from about 1/4 of an inch to maybe 3/8 of an inch. So you want to make sure your signature is inside that area. Okay, this is what the painting looks like now at the end of the third step. The third step, we add the darkest details into the painting. Now, as I take a look at the painting, I feel like it could be made a little bit better if I could add a little bit of highlights back into the painting. Now, in watercolor, that's difficult to do because we have transparent medium, and I cannot put lights back over dark areas. However, you can take a very thick opaque paint, a value paint like yellow, and just drop it in certain areas. So that's what I've done. I've taken my liner brush, which is a very thin #1 round brush called a script brush, and I've put some very thick butter consistency paint, the yellow, which is my lightest color that I'm using in this painting, and I'm just putting down a few highlights along kind of the edge of where the stem is there. I've also noticed that there's a light area on the left side of the stem because the light's coming from the left, and so I'm adding that in there as well. Now, sometimes you just can't get light enough if you're only using an opaque watercolor paint because it's transparent. So you can also use white gouache. Gouache is a water medium, but it is opaque. So I take my script liner brush, I stick it right into the tube of white gouache, and I also mix it into the red I already have on my palette there to create a pink. Now, this is going to be a very light pink color, but it's going to be opaque. And so I'm really wanting to lighten that highlight area on the left side of the apple. So I've mixed up that paint. I'm just going to drop it in there, just dab it really, and kind of create that highlight that I missed when I did my first wash. And so I'm just going to just apply that paint. Now, you do not want to overdo the use of white gouache. If there you too much of it, it really becomes obvious, kind of glaringly obvious, and just doesn't look right. So I'm just putting it in a couple places, those highlights on the two apples, a couple places that I see pretty much a white highlight. And that's the only place I'm going to put it. Okay, there you have it, my finished painting of 2 red apples on a white plate. I think if you compare the painting to the reference image, you can see the values are really very spot on. So the most important thing in your painting is that you get the values right. I hope you've enjoyed this full-length tutorial. If so, you might want to consider subscribing. I put out new videos about once a week. I also have an online studio.krisdebruine.com, where I have a lot of free resources and other courses that you might benefit from. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Have a great day.